Josh, thank you so much for being on the program with us this week. Everybody watching, stay tuned in for next week. That was the first story in the documentary. We're going to get into trafficking and statistics. We're going to get back into the Epstein case. We're going to tie it into how it is connected to the occult, truly the occult. All of that and more on next week's program. You're not going to want to miss it. Josh, thanks for everything that you did with us last week. We're actually, as people are watching, we're still in the studio continuing to film. We're going to pick up right where we left off, which is child sex trafficking. What are some of the more horrifying facts about trafficking that most people don't know, that you even found out while researching for this documentary?
Yeah, and I'll say with these statistics, they're going to sound really bad, and they are, but we used the most conservative numbers that we could find because, again, we don't want to be legitimately accused of being sensationalistic. We didn't want when I had a choice of a lower number or a higher number, if there was a range on how some of these things play out, I always picked the lower, more conservative number because that's horrifying enough, and then nobody can actually say that this is being sensationalized. Now, these statistics, they were hard for me to hear too, because I don't want to think that my country is this bad, that has gotten this far off the rails with this problem, but it has. America is actually ranked one of the worst countries in the world for human trafficking right now. And we wouldn't even think that that's true because we typically don't see it in our day-to-day lives. But actually, many people probably have, and they just don't know it because this goes on in airports. This will happen in public places, but most people just don't know. I mean, it would not surprise me if every single one of us have passed by a child who was being trafficked and just assumed that the child was with, his or her parents, because typically, if a trafficker is going to take a child out, they're not going to look like what we would assume them to look like, disheveled and dirty. They're typically not going to look like that. 1 out of 4 victims of all human trafficking in America, 1 out of 4 victims of trafficking are children. So it's 25% are actually children. Now, this number horrified me, and this is a conservative number. About 500,000 kids, so 500,000 kids, are being trafficked every day in America. So, and that's just America, not the world.
My gosh.
Yeah, that's a conservative number because I saw other numbers from other, well-established sources and things. This isn't just somebody's blog. This is actual government statistics and things. Some were saying as much as over 1 million could be. So again, I had the choice of using 500,000.
And these kids are in America? This isn't worldwide. We're talking about,
in America.
My goodness.
Yeah, it's in America. The worldwide statistics are almost unknowable because other countries aren't going to really be super honest about it. But it's actually even unknowable in our own country. We know it's at least 500,000. It could be more than 1 million, and it probably is. But only 1% of the crime of trafficking is ever reported. So that's why it's really hard to know. So the most conservative estimates that I could find say 500,000, and that's what I put in the movie because again, I would rather not to sugarcoat it, but I would rather be accurate so we know at least 500,000 kids every day. What's even more horrifying than that is a child who is trafficked is, and usually I say abused, but that in a way almost sugarcoats what it is. It's rape. A child who is trafficked is raped on average 5 to 15 times a day. So that means every single day that, we're enjoying life, we're watching Netflix at home, we're living our lives. At least 500,000 kids every day, at least 5 times a day, are being raped every day that we take for granted. This is the lives of these kids. This is what they have to deal with, and they typically don't survive it. But
that was
again,
my question: is that they probably don't survive it.
It's terrible. The average age. Well, actually, yeah. Let me start with this, and then we'll get to that. The survivability. The average age of girls right now actively trafficked is 12 to 14, and boys is 15, and that's young enough. I mean, that's young. That's bad. But what's worse is that these numbers are actually skewed because the average life expectancy of a child who is trafficked is only 7 years. So when they take the statistics of boys and girls that are actively being trafficked, just by nature, they're older, 12 to 15 years old. They're older because they're only counting the children who are alive.
Oh
But
my goodness.
those numbers are skewed because the average life expectancy of any child involved in trafficking is only 7 years, meaning half of the children, half of that, what, 500,000, die before the age of 7, and half are able to survive past that. But that's horrifying. This means that children who die, they're not counted in that average age. Kids die either by the violence of the trauma of the rape itself, because it's an extremely violent act, the drugs that they're given, suicide, or they die alone on the street. And again,
evil.
It really is, and we're only talking about the 1% that we can actually know about, which that itself is horrifying. Even with adults, though. Oh, sorry. Were you going to ask?
I was finish your thought on even on adults, but
Sure.
The question I want to ask you after that is there a certain type of kid that is more at risk than that we should watch out for? Make sure our kid isn't doing this or doing that. But finish your point and then go ahead and answer that question.
Sure. So yeah, absolutely. There is a type of profile of kids that these traffickers look for. But even with adults, even with human trafficking in adults, a lot of trafficking we call prostitution, but it's not real prostitution. And this was something that surprised me in research for the film and in talking with Jaco Booyens. This is something he said in the movie, that over 98% of global prostitutes are not actually prostitutes, they're trafficking victims. Because for it to be prostitution, it has to be completely voluntary, just by definition. Meaning that if there's any force, if they're involved in some kind of fraud, or if they're coerced into doing it, if they're doing it to pay off a debt, or if they're raped, anything like that, if they're ever told that they have to do it, then it's not prostitution, that's trafficking. So Jaco says that their numbers from his organization found that over 98% of global prostitutes are not prostitutes. So think about this. All of these people in America that are, fighting for so-called sex worker rights, they're not fighting for sex worker rights.
They're fighting for sex trafficking.
They're fighting for the freedom of traffickers to abuse adults and children, because traffickers, they'll traffic anybody. They don't care if it's an adult or a child. They're not going to, once somebody's a trafficker, they've crossed that line. They're not going to have any bounds on the evil that they'll participate in.
I have another question before the question that I asked you to answer. So we're going to get to what type of kids are targeted. Now, and this is just totally... And if you're uncomfortable answering this, just let me know.
Not at all.
But there are evil people, okay? The election is just around the corner. There are evil people that are Republicans.
Oh, yeah.
There are evil people that are Democrats.
Absolutely.
It's not like God is a Republican.
Right.
Now, as a Christian, I'm going to vote my faith, and there is a party that is closer to my faith than the other.
Yes.
But why is it that whenever you really get into the elite, the shadow people, these evil, sadistic people in power, why is it that whenever I think of sex trafficking or child sex trafficking, that my brain goes to the left? It seems like they're more proponents of this evil, sadistic way of thinking. There are evil people on the right. I need to make that clear. But the left is more sadistic, more twisted, more pro-pedophilia. Look at California. More pro-gross immorality, prostitution and such. Why is that? What's going on?
They typically, in their positions, they advocate for the freedom to sin, for not only the freedom to sin, but the celebration to sin. And a lot of that centers around sex. A lot of it centers around sexual freedoms. To say that there should be some forms of sex that are not allowed is like, you say that just in normal culture today, and it's you're seen as like a bigot or hateful or something. It's really because they want not only the freedom, but they want the permission and the celebration to sin. And I think it's because we all have a conscience. We all have, because we're all creations of God. It doesn't mean that all of us are saved or that all of us follow follow God, but we're all creations of God. We all have this piece, this something inside us that tells us when we're doing something wrong. And I think one of the main identifiers, and this is generally speaking, but difference between right and left is typically, generally, people on the right, they'll try to listen to that voice. People on the left, they will do anything they can to shut that voice down. That's why you see so much you see so much projection on the left, and you don't see it as much on the right. Projection is where somebody knows they're doing something wrong, so they'll accuse somebody else of doing it, somebody who's not doing that. So you see, like a big one today is racism. You see a lot of people on the left calling people on the right racist, when really, generally speaking, it's the people on the left that are obsessed with race. Typically, people on the right are kind of like, I don't care what color you are, I'm going to love you, however God made you. So you see that with this whole sexual revolution stuff as well. So in order for the left, just generally speaking, again, because again, like you said, there's evil Republicans, there's virtuous Democrat, there's people all over the place. But generally speaking, it really revolves around the freedom to sin. And because in order for the left to remain consistent in their views about sex, they have to take it all the way. There's no reason to stop. There's no place where they can stop. So, if they want same-sex marriage, then what's next? Why not polygamy? If it's just sex and it doesn't hurt anybody and it's all consensual, then why not polygamy? Okay, well, then why not with a child if a child is consenting? And of course, the answer is because a child can't consent because they don't have the ability to, but people on the left want children to vote. They want children to do lots of things that will help the Democratic cause. So unfortunately, we did get a little bit into politics in the bonus materials, but not so much in the movie, because unfortunately this problem, like everything in our country, has become politicized and there's a divide. And I didn't want to give anybody an excuse to not watch the movie. So I want Biden supporters to watch the movie. There shouldn't be anything in there where they feel like they're being attacked, because we don't attack anybody. And I really believe too that the extremists on both sides, the extremists are really a minority. So it's a minority of people on the left that would really advocate for this stuff, but that minority has most of the power. They're in entertainment, they're in politics, they have the loudest voice. I think most people in America that call themselves liberal, when you actually ask them and talk about their positions, they're not liberal at all. They're for capitalism, they're for free market, even though they've been trained to say that they're not. But when you really get down into the principles, past the words themselves and into the definitions, you find out there's actually a lot more conservatives than you would think on the surface. And most people that call themselves liberals, it's kind of like a lot of people call themselves Catholic, but not all Catholics are going to pledge their allegiance to the Pope or do a lot of these like really strict Catholic things that you're supposed to do to be a Catholic. They're really just Christians, but because their family is Catholic, they just kind of adopted that word. You see the same thing with the left or liberals or that kind of thing. Now that's good news, but that's also bad news, because the good news is I believe that there's more people than we would know, than we would recognize on our side in this. People on the left and the right. I think there are a lot of people that would be completely against child sex trafficking, but it's bad news because a lot of those people, and again on the left and the right, stay out of this. Totally. They stay out of this problem. So the loudest voices that you get typically more on the right that deal with this are totally conspiratorial. They're totally unsubstantiated. They will not, they won't vet anything. They'll just post things on Facebook, not knowing if it's even true. I mean, just recently I dealt with this because there was a picture going around supposedly of Chris Wallace and Jeffrey Epstein at Epstein Island.
I've seen it. I've seen that picture.
Yeah.
It's George
Clooney. Not what it is. Exactly. It's George Clooney and Chris Wallace at Lake Como in Italy in 2012. And it's really easy to verify that. But because we had that debate and because Chris Wallace was definitely biased, he wasn't a good moderator. Now a bunch of people don't like him. So now they're going to say stuff like that about him to try to denigrate him or something. But all it's doing is it's hurting people. It's hurting kids because now people aren't going to take their abuse seriously. And it's hurting people who are really trying to help these kids and fight in this fight, because now our credibility is tarnished. Same thing happened with the satanic panic decades ago. There was a lot of sensationalism, but there were some real things that happened too. So we see that kind of happening now. It's really easy for people to brush all of us off as conspiracy theorists because of the few that have the loudest voice on our side that are pushing a lot of this and I'm not even saying that it's all fake. There could be a lot of that stuff that's true, but if you can't prove it and if there's no real reason to believe in it, it goes against the cause to even post it. So that's why in the movie we do deal with a lot of dark areas, but we don't deal with anything that can't be backed up, and we cite all our sources. If something is just an eyewitness testimony, we are very clear about that and we're honest about it, such as the case of satanic ritual abuse. A lot of the evidence for that is eyewitness testimony based, because at least up until now, nobody's been able to take a camera into a ritual to see what's going on. But you know what's strange? Even if they did, though, it would still be looked at as a conspiracy theory, because Bohemian Grove is still seen as a conspiracy theory, even though there's direct video evidence that there's rituals that go on there, but it's still seen as this crazy Alex Jones conspiracy thing. And it's like, well, okay, there's a lot of sensationalism around it, but there's something actually true. So it's the same case with satanic ritual abuse and just the horrific things that happen in this country to our kids.
Let's get back to question number 11 I have on my format. What kids are most at risk?
Yeah, and this was one of the most important parts for me in the documentary, because I have 4 kids, one on the way. I want to know. So in the film, Jaco Booyan says the child that is most at risk is not actually a child who lives in a poor neighborhood like we would typically think, because that child likely has seen crime firsthand, so the radar is going to be more up. Instead, Jaco says that the child that's most at risk is a middle-class suburb child who is oblivious. Wow. And it's like a child that's oblivious that this kind of thing even happens, because they don't, the parents don't really talk to them about it. They don't know. A kid who escapes into a cell phone, whose parents are, probably even still together and relatively well off financially. A family where money kind of solves problems, because that child doesn't have any radar whatsoever. So that's
interesting.
That surprised me too.
It's like no situational awareness. Like the ones that are they just haven't seen the world, they haven't experienced, or they've had no trauma in their life. They have this, well, it's kind of like this normalcy bias, right? That nothing can go wrong because it never really has gone wrong. And so those are the ones that traffickers seek after.
Exactly. And typically in those kinds of families, the family isn't always super strong. They're together, but they're not really like together. So along with kids oblivious to these things, kids who are more withdrawn, or who would be seen as like loners, who aren't as social as most, those are seen as targets, especially if that child does not have the best relationship with their parents, because then a trafficker can swoop in and play the hero. And that's one of many ways that grooming works. So public schools are susceptible, because even if a child doesn't have a cell phone, and this is one of the biggest links to trafficking, even if your kid doesn't have a cell phone, most likely their friends in public school do. And it is now reported that the average age a child sees pornography for the first time is only 9 years old. And pornography is frequently used to desensitize kids to the idea of sex, so they can become easier targets. I mean, kids see this stuff and they think it's funny. They don't think it's a big deal, but traffickers will use that. And sometimes a trafficker can be another kid, even without, grooming a kid, because they're being forced to, or they don't know any better, or they're being used by somebody else. So that happens a lot too. Also, kids who are heavily involved on social media are at risk, because traffickers will use social media in really clever ways to fool kids into making themselves vulnerable. So every social media site, basically every single one, there is inundated with pornography. There's no social media company that has a great track record of policing this stuff. And we talk about it more in the film, but it's also been reported that YouTube, even YouTube Kids, Instagram, Facebook, many others have already allowed pornography on their platforms and continue to do so. So if your kids are on any social media platform, they have direct access to pornography. Mention one more thing too. This is why it's so important for fathers especially, but mothers too, to have a strong family unit, and it's got to be Christ-centered. You cannot bring pornography into the home thinking, well, my kid isn't going to see it. It's just my own thing and it's not hurting anybody, because there is a direct one-to-one link between pornography and child sex trafficking, and you can't get around it. I've actually had people, fathers who are porn addicts. This surprised me, 68%. And this, again, is one of those conservative numbers. This is just the ones that admit it, so it's probably a lot higher. 68% of Christian males, and it's a large number like that for women too, but Christian males are addicted to pornography. So this is not a number just representing, a guy who's seen porn one time when they were a kid and then they didn't. This is an actual habitual addiction that's occurring now, and it's because they think that it's only affecting them. It's not hurting anybody else, but a lot of them feel conviction over it too. And so people have asked me, how do I stop? And there is actually an interview with a woman who was addicted to pornography, and now she runs a ministry that helps people get rid of porn in their lives. And there is an interview in some of the bonus features with the film at skywatchtvstore.com. But what I tell people is, first, this is going to seem obvious, but stop the action. Now, I know that you can't. You can and you can't just stop cold turkey. I mean, you can, but eventually you're going to start feeling that urge again, and it's going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. So in the meantime, once you stop, immediately, right then and there, that moment when you stop, get online and go search for all the articles, and there's a lot of them. Read every single article you can find about the direct one-to-one link between pornography and child sex trafficking. Read about how every single view of pornography directly contributes to this problem of child sex trafficking. It increases the market for it. So you cannot view pornography and be innocent in child sex trafficking. You're helping it along. You're helping grow the market for it. So when you're reading this stuff, you will learn to hate pornography. You'll learn to hate it, and you won't want anything to do with it anymore, because you'll realize, wow, this actually does affect other people. It affects children, and there are children in cages being raped multiple times a day just in order to feed somebody else's entertainment, and that definitely stretches in the realm of pornography. So that's one bit of advice I can give.
And the world does hate child sex trafficking. I mean, the general world hates the thought of that. Look at the outcry because of one man, Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes.
And Jeffrey Epstein, talk about, because he's got to come up. He came up actually even in the documentary. Jeffrey Epstein is very, very connected to this. He's even connected to the government side of this. And he's even connected. And after we talk about Jeffrey Epstein, we need to get into this. We really need to get into and hit this home. This isn't just sin. This is a vile, wicked sin, and it involves the occult. It involves Satanism. This is of Satan. Tell me about Jeffrey Epstein and even how he's connected to the documentary and how he's connected to the occult.
Yeah, one of the most horrifying things about the whole Epstein saga is so many people who witnessed what was going on, just watching the news, saw his murder, saw all that stuff. They thought okay, well, good. Epstein is gone. It's like the one pedophile is gone, and now we're okay. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands even, possibly millions of Epsteins out there. Not all of them are rich. Some of them are janitors at schools. Some of them will sell you a car at a used car lot. Some of them are your neighbors, your mailman. I mean, they're all over the place. It's just not all of them are rich. There is a wealthy elite, though, and Epstein definitely had connections with several of these elite, and that includes politicians, entertainers, influencers. And he owned an island allegedly used for sex parties, including with children. He kept records of everyone who visited this island and confirming many high-level names that have been released. In 2005, he was being investigated. Talk about corruption, government corruption. He was actually being investigated because a parent said Epstein had sexually abused her 14-year-old daughter, to which Epstein pled guilty, but he wasn't convicted until 2008. And even then, only for 2 crimes. He only served a year in custody with extensive work release, despite that federal officers had identified 36 girls, some as young as 14, whom Epstein abused. And in the past, he had strong cases against him, but the charges never really stuck. It shows how our system is broken. It can't be trusted to end child sex trafficking, because when they even get the most high-profile pedophile and trafficker in our country's history, they still botched it time and time and time and time again until he was finally murdered. And nobody believes that he committed suicide, but that's why I say murdered. But and we do deal with that in the movie. But when the charges finally looked like they were going to stick, he allegedly committed suicide, though, again, like I said, many believe he was murdered. Now, he did have connection with the occult, and we find that on his island. So there were several things found on Epstein Island showing that I'll say most likely. I mean, somebody could make the case that this was just decorative art pieces, but I don't think so. I think that I think when you actually look at the film and see what was being covered up, these were used for something. This played a part in his procurement of children and his ritualization of these kids, having to do with the rape and maybe even sacrifice. So one of the most obvious is the temple that was there. Everybody has seen that. But also drone footage has shown a giant sundial that has 13 chairs pointing to what appears to be rune stones. There's gods and goddesses all over the island. There's a giant green man from antiquity. There's labyrinths, which that has direct connection in mythology to child sacrifice, according to ancient mythology, typically Greek, but you can find it elsewhere in the world. We see certain symbols repeated at Epstein's Zorro Ranch in New Mexico as well. So there's this giant rectangle berm area on the island that has the same symbols on his Zorro Ranch. There's 4 paths leading to a circle with a square in the middle of it. Now, what's really strange is images on the island were captured in 2013 of this berm area and on the island showing these symbols. But then in 2017, when investigators were closing in on Epstein, there was this really sloppy effort made to try to cover it up by building a so-called tennis court over the berm area. But you look at this thing, it would be the worst tennis court imaginable, because there's like hills and peaks and you'd snap your ankles. But then in 2019, the inside of the berm area was completely removed, destroying everything that used to be there. So if it was just decoration, then why go through such lengths to cover it up? Now, ancient occult sites discovered around the world have used that same pattern, such as and the 4 paths to the circle and square thing. All of them have used it. Egyptians for human sacrificing, the Mayans for human sacrificing, and again, that's 4 paths leading to a circle encompassing a square. So quite literally, whether it's purely decorative or not, and I don't think there's any reason to think it was, Jeffrey Epstein had at least 2 occult areas dedicated to human sacrifice, one on his island and one on his ranch in New Mexico, here in America, where he and his high-powered friends are known to have gathered. Now, what exactly occurred there, that's where we start getting in the realm of speculation, because we just don't have enough evidence. But I think people can use their imaginations and use their own common sense to figure what probably happened. And again, most horrifyingly, Epstein was just one guy. There's a lot of very high-powered individuals involved in this same thing going on. Actually, Epstein, I think he was murdered because it was sort of a, let's keep attention on Epstein and keep the media's attention off of us. I don't think that it was a murder that was botched. I think that they made it look so obvious, like a murder, so people would focus on Epstein and the conspiracy and focus on the murder, and it would once again bring up this thing, well, you're just a conspiracy theorist. No, well, there's something there. And while we're all arguing about that, nobody's looking at, well, who murdered him? No charges have been filed against anybody. Who are these shadowy elite? How many are there? How many of these pedophiles in high places are there in America? So while we're all focused on Epstein, these guys, this other group, they're getting off scot-free. So Epstein, in a lot of ways, was like their scapegoat. That was their sacrifice to get the spotlight off of them, where they want it. They wanted it on Epstein.
Mm-hmm. The occult is involved with child sex trafficking, and we don't hear about it.
Right.
How do we know the occult groups are actually buying children for sacrificial purposes?
Right. And that's a good question, because part of it is part of it is common sense, and it's not a cop out, because there are actual reasons too. But we know that there are absolutely evil groups that are totally dedicated to Satan in this country, who follow teachings of people like Aleister Crowley. And you gotta remember, this is their religion, right? So they're gonna follow it out to its conclusion. Aleister Crowley wrote about how to use the blood of young children in magic rituals, and we talk about that in the film. And we know that there are people who take that stuff very seriously and believe all of it. We don't know how many. It might not even be that many, but there are still groups that do here in America. We also know that there are people who sell children and do not care what anybody does with them. They only care about money. So it's really just putting those two together. The trafficker will sell a child to somebody who's going to use the child for rape, or somebody the trafficker doesn't know where the child is going or to who, and he doesn't care because he's getting paid. So an occult group can easily, buy a child just the same way that Epstein would, for ritualistic purposes. So the means are there, the ability is there. So the question is, why would they not? Everything in their own religion says that this is how you perform these rituals. This is okay. It's fine to do this. So what would stop them? They don't have some kind of morality that limits that. But we can also be confident that this is happening because of the independently corroborated testimonies of survivors who might not talk to the public, but they'll talk to counselors or advocates of victims, which is why we have 2 SRA advocates and experts in the movie, and even more in the bonus materials, people who work firsthand with these victims. And based on what these experts say, there are children rescued from these occult groups in different parts of the country, and independently of each other, all tell the same types of stories. They describe the same events. They even draw the same pictures with the same symbols of what they saw, things that they would conceivably have no other way of knowing except to have experienced it. Typically things too horrendous for even adults to talk about. And these children have no ability to network with each other. So somehow they're all coming up with the same story. It's either that it's happening, or, which is the most obvious explanation, or there's some type of mass hallucination, or there's some type of mass conspiracy that kids are trying to lie to adults and they are correlating with each other somehow, which, it gets into the realm of absurdity when we start trying to think of alternative explanations for how all of these kids come up with the same stories. And then, somebody might say, yeah, but I don't trust the investigators. Then I don't trust the advocates. I don't trust people who are working with so-called SRA survivors to actually tell the truth. Well, you got to remember, this is what they do for a living. So why would they get into an area of work such as this just to lie about it and put their own credibility on the line, where if they get caught in a lie, they're done? They're not going to have work anymore. They're not going to have a job. So that doesn't make sense to me. And that's even going beyond the fact that just on a personal level, the people that I brought into the movie, I know personally, and I trust them and believe them, but that doesn't mean that people should take my word for that. I absolutely encourage everybody to check out the experts we bring in the film, look at their track record, look at the things that they've said in the past, see if they are prone to sensationalism, see if their stories on anything has changed over the years, because I've done all of that and I haven't been able to find anything that would lead me to any kind of suspicion or that has thrown up a red flag. That is not to say that there are not liars out there. There are liars, there are sensationalists, there's a lot of them. There's a lot more sensationalists than I think there are genuine people in the world, but that's why we all have to be incredibly careful. We have to do our homework. We should not be posting anything unless we know. And that's why typically I stick with eyewitness testimonies. And if I'm providing something like that, I want it to be corroborated by multiple sources, but I'm also going to be honest and say, this is from an eyewitness. This isn't anything that's on camera or that could be like proven in that way. It's from an eyewitness. So we do that in the film too. So when people watch the film, they're going to know what's eyewitness, what is fact from some type of source, because we cite everything. And so that way we just lay it out for the audience, and they can decide for themselves what seems credible, what seems logical, and if anything doesn't, then they can make that decision for themselves. But I tried to be really careful to not allow any of the sensational stuff in the movie.
And I really do appreciate that. And even Josh, as we just start to wrap this up, I know how difficult it must have been to create this documentary. I'm a researcher, and just going down some of the rabbit holes that you have to go down to research some of these topics, it sometimes can be overwhelming. And I just appreciate that God called you to do this, because I'm sure one of the things that you discovered is just how vast it is, and that's why one of the things I appreciated about the documentary is that in the last part of the film, you made a case for hope, and I just want to say, and I believe it, but I know you do too. Do you believe that we can see an end to child sex trafficking?
Yes, yeah. I by and large, generally speaking, yes. I think as long as we live in this fallen world, there's always going to be, discrete cases here and there. But the way that it is now, it's an industry. Underground in America, it is an industry, and it's massive. I think that can end. And I think the way that
it'll have to start with the cultural movement,
yes,
of people that are just simply listening at home doing something.
Exactly. That's the only way that this is going to get turned around. So people can make good individual choices. Don't give your money to entertainment companies that sell smut and call it entertainment. Don't rent and buy movies that have sexually explicit material in it, even if it's not pornography. But we need to start creating a culture that's not over sexualized. Like, sex sells, and that's not a good thing. Sex should not sell. So we need to start creating that culture, and we start by doing it in our individual lives, in our families, in our homes, and that can spread out to communities, to churches, that can spread out across state lines, and that can spread to the country. And then America can be that shining beacon, that light to the world that in some other areas it is, and it definitely used to be, and that can start influencing the whole world. So that's what we need to do, is start taking this seriously as individuals and saying, okay, I may not be able to control what my neighbor does, but I can control what I do. I'm not going to allow anything sexually explicit in this house, because I'm not going to contribute and give money to this over-sexualized culture just so they can make more of it, because that's what has led to this problem. The more money sex brings in, the more perverse sex is going to get, and we've seen that trend. So it really takes an individual choice. And I'll say, if people watch the movie, they can get it at skywatchtvstore.com.
Yes.
And it comes with a bunch of bonus.
So go to say it one more time, where to go.
Yep, skywatchtvstore.com. It comes with a bunch of bonus materials. 100% of the profits goes to Whispering Ponies Ranch, which is a ministry that helps kids who have been rescued from child sex trafficking, helps them heal. So 100% of the profits go there. And I would ask people too, whether they get it at Skywatch or whether they get it on Amazon, because you can get it on Amazon, you can stream it there. Please leave a review, because we're trying to convince Amazon, and it can only be done through good reviews. Well, honest reviews, I'll say. Don't give me 5 stars just because you like me or whatever. Like, give it an honest review. But if you feel we deserved 5 stars, that's what we want to see, because that kind of thing is going to convince Amazon to start suggesting it. Because again, the world is run by money. Unfortunately, if Amazon thinks that they can make money on it, that if they suggest it to their audience, then their audience will buy it. Amazon absolutely will do that. So we need to convince them, look, this is what we want to see on these streaming services. We want to see good, wholesome movies, informative, truthful films like Silent Cry. We want to see this. Give your money to that, to start teaching Amazon and Netflix and Hulu and all of these platforms that's the kind of culture we want to live in. That's the entertainment that we want. That's what we want to see. If Amazon starts suggesting that to everybody on their list, even if they just put it in their new release category, that can go such a long way to spreading the awareness of child sex trafficking. You have no idea how much power one review has, because I don't know what that magic number is. How many 5-star reviews do you need for Amazon to put it in their new release category or in their customers also watched category? I don't know where that magic number is, but once we hit it, once we hit that, this thing can go global. It can really be a big deal. And again, it's not for me. It's not for my fame or notoriety or anything like that. It's not just to sell a movie. It's to raise awareness for these kids and provide much needed funds for these kids in order to heal and live a normal life in Jesus. So that's ultimately what the motivation behind it is. So I highly encourage people, please leave us a review.
Amen. Amen. Josh, thank you so much for joining us on the program today. If anybody is seeing you for the first time, tell us just really quickly, where can they find you? How can they find your content and what you do?
Sure. Best place to go is skywatchtv.com. And then if they're looking for me personally, dailyrenegade.com is my website. It's kind of a collection of internet shows and stuff, all based around Christ, all based around Christianity, good, solid theology. And I'm on basically every social media outlet. So people can find me on Twitter at JP Disclosure. They can find me at Facebook, although I have hit my 5,000 friend limit, unfortunately, but I think people can still follow me on there. And Instagram, Parler, I'm on a bunch of places, but Daily Renegade is like a good central hub for all that stuff. But if they're really interested in kind of the more ministry efforts, then skywatchtv.com is definitely the place to go.
Josh, I really, and I'm not just saying this, I'm so glad you came on the program today.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure being on.
So grateful for all that you're doing with this documentary and just in your life and in your ministry. It really is an inspiration. Thank you for coming on the program today.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for being one of the brave few that's willing to talk about this issue openly. Thank you for being one of those people that, and I've heard this a lot of times now from some others that have not said, Josh, my credibility is on the line here. I can't bring this onto my show. Thank you for not being one of those, and thank you for, most importantly, just thank you for your friendship and your brotherhood. I love you to death, and give my best to your family and to your amazing audience. Thank you so much for watching this episode and for inviting me into your lives for this brief time.
Amen. Thank you. For those that are watching, that's going to do it for today's program. Make sure you tune in next week as we'll have a brand new show. The election is just around the corner. We're going to be digging right back into, election topics.